Hi there, welcome to our lecture on activism and public interest. I'm very pleased for this lecture to set it up as an interview with a specialist that we have working in our public interest communication course here at UQ. So our interview today is with Dr. Robyn Gulliver, who's one of the teaching team in the course. Robyn's a multi-award winning environmentalist. She's a writer and researcher who has served as an organiser and leader on numerous environmental organisations. Her research focuses on the antecedents and consequences of environmental and pro-democracy activism. So welcome, Robyn. Thanks for coming along.
Thank you for inviting me, Jen.
So, Robyn, I'm going to ask you first, because you've got a book in front of you there, to tell us a little bit about this book, which ties in very nicely with this topic, with what we're talking about today.
Yes, this is my book. It's called The Advocates, Women Within the Australian Environmental Movement. It's published by Melbourne University Press, and it tells the stories of 9 female activists or advocates in Australia who have worked to try and protect the environment in a range of different arenas and a range of different types and channels and with lots of different people.
Oh, cool. Fantastic. And I guess that segues into my first question to you. What's the difference between advocacy, activism and protest as you see it, and within the research that you've done?
Yes, so we use these words interchangeably, and in different countries we also use different words. So in Australia we tend to think of advocacy as an umbrella term. So when you are trying to change someone's opinion or change someone's behaviour or change policies and laws, you're engaging in advocacy. And so that is the type of thing you're doing, and it can take many different forms. So the way it can take a form is, for example, is through protest, yes, through doing a rally or a march on a street. It could take form through a petition. It could take form through holding a public meeting with your Member of Parliament. So that might be what protest is. Whereas in the middle, I tend to think of activism as an active form of advocacy. So that might be where we do things like blockades or sit-ins. We're actually physically using our body to get in there and do our advocacy that way. So advocacy is the umbrella term, activism is the active form, and protest is one type.
Oh, cool. Thanks for explaining that. So we've looked at in this course discourse arenas or public arenas. So how can we position activism as playing out in these discourse arenas which deal with social and political problems and issues?
I think this is really helpful to think of the word advocacy here, because in any discourse arena you're going to have groups or individuals with a different perspective, and each of these groups, I think of it in my head like a soccer game in a way, each of these groups are trying to put forth their particular concern or their particular issue. Now you can do that from multiple sides. Activism, let's say environmental activism, like the women in my book, they might be in this discourse arena seeking to change an environmental law. That could be one thing. There might be another group in this discourse arena who are businesses, a representative of a business industry, for example. They don't want these particular laws, like say stopping coal mines. They don't want those laws put in place. So each arena is essentially where advocacy takes place. Advocacy to me is a critical part of discourse arenas.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for explaining that. So what are the different types, I guess, of activism that are played out beyond protest? Can you give us some further examples, I guess, following on from that question?
Yeah, I mentioned a few earlier. Could be things like signing a petition. I guess many of us in many countries around the world have signed petitions for various causes. You might be active on social media, so you could be following a particular group that you like, a not-for-profit organisation perhaps, and you comment on their posts and you try and push forth their perspective to other people that you know. You can have Twitter storms, you can have public forums, like I mentioned before. A lot of groups that I've studied, environmental groups in Australia, they have information nights. And another very popular form of advocacy is actually doing film screenings. So a group might create a film about a particular issue, say climate change, and then they give that film away for free to all these other groups who can show it to the public. And doing so, you make your particular public interest group bigger, right? You bring people to your cause and that makes you more powerful. So many different forms of advocacy, and I guess the challenge for groups is to find out what is the most effective form for the issue that they have.
Yeah. So when all these groups are advocating for their cause, and you've touched on this to some extent, but what would be the main forms of communication and media that they tend, or maybe, that they tend to use, whether it's face-to-face, mediated or whatever?
It's changed over time, right? Now we have the online world, of course. A lot of it takes place online, particularly during the pandemic. If you have been watching or active online, you might have seen a lot of groups doing online protest, if you like, where they kind of inundate a particular organisation to try and make them change their policies. So they'll do that through messages, they'll do it through phone calls, they'll do it through something I saw recently was sending bulk calendar invites to CEOs to try and clog up their calendars. These are all forms of communication that are being kind of co-opted for advocacy, if you like. When you think of traditional offline advocacy, it's all about communication, writing letters to your MP, writing letters to the newspaper, perhaps trying to make an appointment with your Member of Parliament as well, or your representative. These are all different communication channels which are used to promote your particular cause. So there's an intrinsic link between communication and advocacy.
Absolutely. And this is also, I guess, loosely using the term lobbying, that they are lobbying the government. Is there any kind of connection there with lobbying and activism?
Yes, lobbying is traditionally seen as one of the core channels of activism or advocacy, if you like. I guess the difference in lobbying is the power of the group who does the lobbying. So advocates in Australia, perhaps for some small environmental issue, a local issue, won't have much power in terms of their lobbying ability. So they might not even gain the ability to have a meeting with their representative. Whereas other groups have formed, for example, Citizens Climate Lobby, which came out of the United States, which is a very, very strong lobby group of activists for cap and trade, for control of carbon emissions. Well, they have more power because they have thousands and thousands of volunteers and they have generated relationships with politicians to enable them to lobby. So yes, lobbying is fundamental to advocacy, but the power that you have behind your lobby group is what matters.
Yeah, absolutely. And we look at partnerships in this course as well. So I guess that's another link, is partnering with other organisations to make your lobby group more powerful?
Absolutely, and social enterprises, I feel, are a good example of this too, because something that politicians and perhaps business owners and various stakeholders find a little bit challenging is when activism gets a bit confrontational. So confrontational activism, or perhaps angry emotional activism, can sometimes work against the activists and put people off. Whereas what has been evolving more that I've seen in my research is the development of social enterprises or collectives or various groups that are saying we're not going to do this type of confrontational advocacy, but we're going to create the world that we want to see.
Yeah.
A really good example are the renewable energy cooperatives. In Australia there has been challenges getting strong renewable energy targets. So what a lot of groups have done is said, we're just going to create our own business. We're going to put a huge amount of solar panels on a local factory. We're going to make money from it, and we're going to put that money back in our community as a social enterprise. It is a form of advocacy. It's just an adaptation of it.
Fantastic. That's a great example. Well, I've learned a lot today. I think it's been really interesting talking to you about your work and your insights into advocacy and activism and protest. Thanks very much for being part of the lecture series, Robyn.
Thank you, Jane. It's been great being here.